All right, New Age Christian family, here we are with another podcast episode with a co-host. Say hello, Kat.
Hello, Kat.
Okay, well, that is technically what I told you to say. So, you have previously met Kat on an episode interview with a New Age Christian. We did with her. And I mentioned at the end of that episode that Kat, of all the people in this community that I am close with, has really the most experience in the New Age side of the world and the New Age side of discussions. And so one of the things that we've talked about a few times is kind of starting to bring in some of those concepts and some of the major pieces of the New Age community and the New Age religion or the New Age way of life is probably the best way to say it. And kind of demystifying, picking things apart, getting into them. What do you do with these things? How do you justify them together with Christianity? And, is there any bullcrap in it? Is there any real value in it? There's 1,000 questions coming from the Christian world. I know that I was told that, the New Age religion and all New Age things were of the devil because apparently Bobby Boucher's mom is not the only one who thinks that everything is the devil.
Okay.
So today we want to talk about crystals and stones and all of that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I actually think I mentioned that in your interview that we were going to do. The first one was going to be on crystals.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how many of you, by show of hands, how many of you in the audience thought that, like, when I said the word crystals, the hair went up on the back of your neck?
Yeah, it kind of has like I don't know, it can bring up negative emotions. Like crystals are like woo-woo and witchcraft and stuff like that. And so you can call them stones if it makes you feel safer. You can say stones. Because rocks is just kind of rude, I think.
So insensitive to the rocks. The stones.
Yeah, but crystals usually, like, even for me, I've been working with them for a few years now, and it's still kind of like, oh, crystals. I mean, New Age people like don't bat an eye, but coming from the Christian realm, it's kind of like, but they work.
Right.
So I still feel like I have to justify myself with them.
So
I usually use
you even mentioned like they work. Right?
They do.
This episode we have a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah.
Right. So first is, why the crap are we even talking about this? Then the second is, I think Kat's journey is, as someone who grew up Christian, I think your journey is very relevant. And so we'll kind of dive into how you got into this. And then we're going to try to end with some, practical application, maybe a bit of 101, introduction to crystals 101 type of thing. So, okay. So some of the people listening to this may be completely clueless as to why am I listening to a podcast about rocks now? But
stones.
Rocks, but not rocks. They're stones, crystals.
You can call them whatever.
Like, I grew up in Arizona, and so Sedona, Arizona is just a couple hours north of Phoenix, where I grew up.
Lots of rocks.
Lots of. And we could even get into vortexes as well. But,
oh, man.
Sedona is one of the New Age capitals of the world. Right? I don't think anybody would argue that, even in the New Age community. And some would say it's the best, right? Which is, it's in many ways, especially with vortexes and stuff, it's kind of like a mecca of the New Age community. And my wife and I used to go up there all the time for lunches and stuff, and just loved the red rocks and everything. It's beautiful, beautiful country. Mm-hmm. But you go there and it is like New Age central.
Were you scared?
I was a bit, because you're like, growing up at the church, I'm like, now I got to tell you my first experience.
Okay.
I'm driving up to Sedona, and that's not my first experience in Sedona, but like with the whole New Age side of it. And Joni and I are driving up, and I look over, and up on this mountain is this naked person in like a Buddha pose, like a cross-legged, yoga pose, meditative pose. And then there's like another naked person like doing some yoga thing, like on another rock. And
was it a Thursday? Because
are you serious?
No.
Okay. See, that's how much I don't
Okay.
know. Well, maybe Thursday's their Sunday. I don't know. So, I mean, that's like that ignorance is like pervasive throughout the Christian world. So,
if you want to stand naked on a rock, you can do it any day.
Perfect. Oh my gosh. So, I'm not really interviewing you. This is a discussion,
Right.
but I really want to know, like, why are we talking about crystals? Why is this even a subject?
You asked me to.
That's
Just kidding.
technically
Yes.
true. Yes.
Actually, this came about for me. I'm always very spirit-led in my journey. Everything, like I have this spiritual radar that, like, spirit will introduce things just really lightly and delicately on the outskirts of this radar. And I'm like, okay, that's a thing that exists. It's cool. And then like a month or two will go by and I'll get closer and I'll keep seeing it. Like it'll pop up everywhere. And, so everything that I do and everything that I've delved into in the New Age community or different types of spirituality and stuff like that has always been spirit-led. It's always been...
That's a good idea.
Yeah. It is. Because there's some scary stuff out there.
Right.
Really. So everything that I've gotten into or looked into has always been led by spirit. And rocks are the same. Now I'm calling them rocks. Damn it. So were we going into personal story or why we're talking about rocks?
For me, there's a bigger picture that I don't know if everyone in the audience, understands that stones, crystals, rocks, gems, that there is a spiritual value to them, right? And for me, it was... So when you first started to get into stones, I remember us having a conversation. It was essentially like, hey, Spirit is showing me this stuff. And I think by that point you had kind of stepped into your identity. So you weren't coming to a teacher for permission, but you certainly were like, this is really fascinating. Is there any kind of Christian context that would suggest why Spirit would have me, getting into stones and crystals and all that? Mm. And for me, coming from the world of types and shadows and the biblical side, the answer is unequivocally yes. Right? Why are we talking about stones and crystals and stuff? Because they're all throughout the Bible. And if you don't know, the high priest garments had 12 stones on them. If you listen to my podcast episode on Satan or their lack thereof, you'll realize in Ezekiel 28, you have the being in the garden who had 9 stones, which are 9 of the same 12 stones on the breastplate of righteousness. You've got the Urim and the Thummim, which are the white and the black stone that were inside the ephod. And you've got all the stones at the base of the New Jerusalem in Revelation. And so stones and gems in particular, and some of them were crystals, some of them were gemstones, and some of them were just rocks, right? They're very biblically based. They're extremely important in the discussion, and we'll get to some of the uses. One of my favorite one is the idea of a totem or a sastoon for stones, because that was the governing. People don't realize, like, Israel used stones as their judge and jury. Like, literally, they used a white and a black stone to cast judgment on people on whether or not they were innocent or guilty.
Yeah, and that gets into like oracle type things as well, which is neat. Yeah, and as far as it being Christian, like, God made all of them.
What?
Like, all of the rocks, God made them. And so there's I guess from my journey and how this came about for me, I had like this season of just like intense lessons. There was like 5 lessons that all came to a head at once. Mind was blown. Life was changed. It was awesome. And then he's like, just rest now. I'm like, oh, I want more. Like, how long do I rest for? He's like, just rest. I'm like, for like a week. He's like, just, calm down.
I'll let you know.
I know. And I'm like, oh. And so it was about a month into my rest. And I was watching a show or a movie or something. And he keeps like popping this image of I've had to Google this thing. I didn't even know what it was. I'm like, how do I Google this? I don't even know what you're showing me.
Right.
It was essentially a selenite tower. It's like a light, shifty stone. And he kept showing that to me. I had seen once before in a shop somewhere I was traveling, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. I want to buy it, but I'm like 34. I don't need to be collecting rocks. And so like I really wanted to buy it, and I didn't, because I'm like, what am I going to do with a rock? And so I didn't. But because I had that point of reference, he kept showing that to me, and I'm like, okay. I'm like, you haven't talked to me in a month. I'm watching a show. Right. You want to do this now? Right. So
how rude.
I know. And so like it was so insistent that I had to pause. I'm like, I told my husband, I'm like, all right, I need to pause this. Spirit keeps showing me something. He's not letting up. So I need to Google something really quick. And then he gave me like the names of 2 specific stones, and then like the visual of another stone. And so I'm like, okay, like rocks. All right. So I look them up, and the selenite tower is like used for like divine communication and to like amplify that. Like I looked for it everywhere, and the only place I found it was like a new age crystal-y thing. I'm like, what are you doing to me? Like, what are you asking me to do here? Like,
right.
So I was really weirded out by it for a while. And then I looked up the other stones that he told me, like, was labradorite and amethyst, and I looked those up on a New Age website, because they're the ones that know,
right? Because
they are not afraid of rocks, I guess.
Oh my gosh!
Well,
when you put it that way,
well,
are you afraid of rocks? Like that's
some people are, I guess. I mean, if you throw them hard enough, but
sure. Goliath was afraid of rocks. Actually,
reason.
He wasn't afraid enough.
True. He probably didn't have time to be afraid of rocks. Right. Anyway.
He should have been.
He should have been. Which means, well, anyway. So, yeah, I looked into him, and he led me down this path of looking into them, and I'm like, okay, I trust you, I see what you're doing, but they're gonna have to prove it. If you're telling me that, like, rocks have powers, I need to see them. And, right. He actually had already shown me, like, I got thrown off a horse a couple of weeks before. Oh, this was when he was telling me to rest. And I'm like, rest, like, in what? Like, I can still keep doing this and this and this, and then you'll get back to me or something. So I fell off a horse and literally could do nothing but lay in bed for a week. I'm like, okay. I don't believe God threw me off a horse, but I was definitely resting. So after, like, I fell off this horse and got dragged through the gravel. And so I don't know, when I finally stood up, I saw a fossil on the ground, and I'm like, oh, a fossil. And I like bend down super, super slow, excruciating pain, because I had a sprained hip joint, to like pick up this rock and put it in my pocket. I don't know why, but I super needed that rock. And then it wasn't months into my crystal journey that I'm like, oh, I should look up fossils, because I remembered that I picked up that fossil when I fell off a horse. And fossils help with, like, your skeletal system and healing bones and all of this other stuff. And I'm like, holy crap. Mm-hmm. And I kept that rock in my pocket. I didn't take it out or anything. I just, like, when it was in there, I'd hold it or something. And I had gone to the chiropractor, and he's, like, adjusted things. And he's like, okay. And I had a dance thing coming up in a couple of months. He's like, you should be okay by then. Like, this was December, February, you should be okay. You should be able to move by then. Like, oh, good. And I was like back riding horse 8 days later.
Nice.
So
the doctor told you it should take a couple months.
Yeah.
And you had a rock in your pocket.
A magic rock. But I think that when we have the intention and the understanding, they can be even more powerful because we can, like, the intention and the belief is there. Like, that was before I even knew anything about stones. And it was just in my pocket. But that was kind of his, like, oh, remember this? Like, you're not crazy. I'm not crazy. But going back to, like, God created all of them. And we don't have a problem believing that herbs and plants and stuff like that have healing properties. It's the same thing. And there's thousands of plants that we use medicinally and we trust, and even our like modern medicine today is based off of that plant-based medicine. And he made all of those plants. And if all of the rocks were the same and they were just there to be rocks, they would all be gray and just laying there. Like, everything is vibration, which we know, like matter and emotion, everything is vibration. Mm-hmm. And so, color is vibration. So you have a stone that's purple. It has a specific vibration that interacts with the vibrations in your body and in your emotions and in your mind. Mine sounds crazy.
But okay. So that certainly, it's worth drilling down there for a second, because it's one of the things that a lot of religious and ancient traditions have been, mocked for by the modern scientific way of thinking, is that things like mantras or meditation or prayer or symbols or, stones and crystals, like any of that stuff is just bullcrap. It's just stupid superstition. Lots of everyone says it about the things that they don't agree with.
Sure. Or they don't understand, yeah.
Right. So, and even Christians who believe in prayer suddenly don't believe in meditation. Mm-hmm. Right. Or people who love yoga who believe in meditation don't believe in prayer or singing worship songs and praise and worship. Like, all of these practices that religion has carried for thousands of years, I believe quantum physics is proving over and over and over and over again that what they've been playing into is what we now know is vibration and frequency. And so if it's a mantra, if it's a stone, if it's a worship song, if it's a prayer, if it is a liturgy, right? And you go into the Catholic Church or different churches where there's we do the same things all the time. We pray the same prayers all the time. I mean, those are incantations. Right? They're spells. They are, right? It's freaking
Don't
crazy.
tell anybody.
Don't tell anybody that's what they've been doing.
I know.
Right? Well, but I've been doing it for good. True. Intention matters, and that's where you can use the
majority of it's done for good.
Right. Yeah. Most people are trying to make tomorrow better for them and for everyone else. Occasionally people want to make tomorrow worse for each other. Right? And so you can use these same vibrations and these same truths and these same principles for darkness. You can create darkness. But for the most part, most people are trying to create light how they define it. Mm-hmm. And that is, to me, I just want to drill down on that vibratory reality, because quantum physics does prove everything is energy. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts are a vibration. Your emotions are in a vibration. Your bones, your hip joint is a vibration. Mm-hmm. Even your blood, it's all a vibration. And when we get low emotion and by the way, even medicine, right? So now people go, oh, well, you have a really low emotion, you should take this drug. Right. The drug's just a vibration, mm-hmm. right? And you take this magic pill and you won't be depressed anymore. But for years it was, well, go spend time sitting with nature and pick up the vibration of the earth, or go sing this song, or go have this meditation and you won't be depressed anymore, because they were picking up vibrations from nature, not from pills. Right. They were picking up vibrations from spiritual tradition, not from science. but it's all still vibration. It's all still coming from the same place. So, yeah, the stone that you had in your pocket that is next to your hip that carries a vibration, that carries a frequency. And I guess at this point, we are getting into the scientific reality of stones and crystals and plants and drugs and positive or negative.
Yeah.
Positive or negative. So.
Yes. Yeah, but that is I need, in my spiritual walk, I need that science behind it. I believe you, I trust you, but I want to see it. And I want to know why it works. And I don't want to just be like, oh yes, rocks heal, and just go with it. Because again, if people come to me and be like, well, why does it work? I'm like, I don't know, I just believe. Which is part of the reality, is like the intention and the belief in it, but I also want to be able to explain it. I want to explain it to myself. I'm not that easily won over by something that feels so out of the box. And
it's no different than when Christians go, prayer works. And you're like, okay, how?
Right.
And they're like, what? I don't know.
God
it just
does it.
It works. You're like, it's just as unexplainable to most people.
I know, or explaining, like, well, why do you believe in God?
Well,
because I do.
Right.
But this actually has scientific stuff behind it. And like quartz crystal is like, it vibrates at the same frequency as the human body. And so illness causes a lower vibration. And so if you find these stones, that will raise that vibration specifically. There's stones that interact with your kidneys specifically because of their color and their composition, what they're made of, vibrates at a specific frequency. It's not because it's magic. It's just, it's matter. Mm-hmm. And again, God made them as tools for us. Mm-hmm. It's not like, that's why, going back to the previous podcast about the freedom of New Age Christianity, and understanding that these beautiful tools and gifts that we were given by God, we can reclaim them and start using them for what they were intended to be. So, yeah, it was a long journey of like, so actually there's a stone for that. Being that friend for a while, like just dropping stones in people's pockets. But
you gave me I think you gave us and a bunch of the basement Bible study group for Christmas one year. You gave us each a satchel of stones.
Yep.
I still have them.
Oh.
Yeah. You've given me a few.
Mm-hmm.
Different times. I love it. I have my two favorite. The white one and the black one.
I wonder why. Do you use them for judging?
Yes. No.
Will I be his friend or not?
Will I condemn them to hell, or shall I forgive them?
Exactly.
That's essentially what they were. But no, not for me.
Oh, okay.
No.
It's like, oh, no.
In the Bible, that's what they were.
Okay, all right. Well,
can you imagine like actually stoning somebody because the stone came out black?
Yeah. It's a Thursday.
Because it's Thursday?
No. But that's something that you can use too, going back to, like, you can use them for that, for like that discernment. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't, don't
stoning
don't
people?
Abuse it. maybe don't stone people as like a base rule.
Yeah, right.
Let's just throw that out.
Okay.
But yeah, being able to, like with muscle testing, like we understand how muscle testing works.
Right.
Or using a pendulum is connected in the same way to muscle testing, and it's got scientific base for that as well. But prophecy, or like with Christians when they're having a rough day, and like I just need a word from God, and you open your Bible and it just happens to give you a scripture that is perfectly on the nose for what you're going through. That's the same type of communication as the Urim and Thummim. Like getting that communication clearly, like getting prophecy from God. Like it gives you another option for communication besides the burning bush or being struck by lightning. So.
A lot of shaman have something, especially Native American shaman in like Central America, Aztecs, Incas, and stuff like that. They had something called a sastoon, which was basically their version of the Urim and the Thummim, right? And so we'll look at, Christians will go, well, that was the high priest and those were the Jews. And so clearly that was God ordained. But that dirty, rotten shaman over there who uses a different kind of stone.
You're going to get mail.
Right.
Dirty, rotten shaman.
Right, exactly. I mean, there's so much, I don't know. I won't say it's unfounded fear in the, it's probably a good moment to validate the potential abuses of any of these tools. In the same way that I would validate that you can pray without any results, and you can pray the same prayer for 20 years that your sister would get saved, and she doesn't get saved, and you can pray negative things, you can pray all sorts of stuff, and abuse or misuse or completely remove the power from prayer. You can do the same thing with stones. You can do the same thing with, you are a creator, right? And when Christians step into these subjects and go, that's powerless. Well, congratulations.
If you throw them hard enough, it's going to hurt no matter what.
This is true. But
There's
I guess
always an application for stones.
I've just had so many conversations with people where, and this does, I guess there would be one caveat to that, is just the natural frequency value of stones, and that your intention doesn't just make it non-existent, right? I don't believe in crystals. Doesn't mean the crystal disappears.
That's the thing is like especially right now, there's like a resurgence or this big boon of crystals are everywhere. Like you can pick it up at Target. You have like a chunk of amethyst in your living room. It's still going to vibrate at that frequency. It's still going to give you benefit. I think that if you come in with that hard and fast, like crystals don't work, it's bullshit. Like I think you can block yourself from that. It's still going to be vibrating purple. It's still going to be vibrating purple rock fumes. Or that energy, it's still going to be there. And you still get the benefits if you're not like... Because we are creative beings, we can create our reality. Yeah. Your reality is you're blocking the benefit of that.
I have a
jerk.
A big I don't block them.
Not you.
Oh, okay. I have a brother that I hope, my younger brother. I really do hope that I can have him on this podcast someday.
Well, be nice with what you say next.
He and I's story is beautiful. It's painful and beautiful. When I started down this path, he did not come with me, and he loves Jesus, loves God, loves the church, and we could not be further apart now and still call ourselves Christians, because he is as far as I still know, he's a Calvinist, right? He is if you know anything about Calvinism, you know everything that includes, and it is the exact opposite of New Age Christian. Okay. Yet, I think he and I could have a fascinating series of podcasts together because he has learned how to respect. And he has learned how to, and we've both, my wife recently, the last conversation he and I had over Thanksgiving last year, she just commented, she's like, this conversation was the most fascinating conversation I think I've ever heard. Because we both came at everything so incredibly differently. All that to say, he... At one point, he believes that healing and all that stuff, he's a cessationist, meaning that the miracles don't happen anymore. Oh. And that they died with the last apostle. Okay. So I asked him, I was like, so what do you do with all the miracles that happen?
It's the devil.
And he was like, well, I've never seen one. And I was like, oh my gosh, of course you haven't.
Yeah.
Because... You don't believe they don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if you do see one, you don't give the credit to it. And I said, dude, like, have you ever YouTubed? You familiar with YouTube? He was like, stop it. And I was like, dude, just Google miracles, like read a blog, watch a video. And he literally was like, well, how do I know they're true? How do I know? And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to get through to this. Mm-hmm. But that is a very stark example of what a lot of people do when they're presented with anything New Age.
Yeah, yeah.
right? And they're like, well, I don't believe in crystals, therefore they must not be true. I've had, my sister-in-law gave me one, and she's this crazy woo-woo person. This person, Kat, gave me a crystal, and it didn't do anything for me. Well, congratulations. Like, surprise, surprise. And so I think step one is openness, right?
And I do think, like, there's a lot to say with, even if because I've given stones to people, and I can see that they're helping, but because they don't believe in them, or because they're like, no, that doesn't work, they're never going to connect the two. They're just, right. It's a coincidence that this in my life also changed.
Right.
It has nothing to do with the rock in my pocket. Like,
right.
If it's still there.
Well, and that is where you do, if you could see the vibration. So would you consider magnets a stone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's magnetic stones, like
right.
lodestones and hematite.
And then you got minerals too. Most of them are stones, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, we take minerals for vitamins and minerals and all that stuff. So we know there's a medicinal value of frequency there. Like for me, I had a neck injury for years that I've had. Maybe I should tell that story sometime about how it got healed over time, including some major miracle moments, everything like that.
Tell your brother.
But the final, right? I think I did. And I think it was dismissed as a coincidence. But anyway, the final layer of the healing of my neck was on the physical plane, right? So I had some spiritual healing, some emotional, soul healing, and then finally physical healing. And what the trick that finally did it was putting magnets and taping magnets to my neck for a few days at a time. Just these two little medical magnets by a company called NAC, mm-hmm. And studying the magnetic resonance and how literally in the West especially, but really worldwide, we have magnetic deficiency disorder, which in Asia, they actually have a name for it called magnetic deficiency disorder. They actually have treatments for it, and it's known as a condition. In America and the West, Western medicine, we have no acknowledgement that your body is frequency. And here's the crazy thing is that the globe, the planet, the poles are shifting right now.
Yeah.
They have been for a while. If you've not heard that, that's another you should go YouTube it. YouTube, Inuit Indians talking about how the sun doesn't rise in the same place that it did their whole lives. They estimate it's shifted about 2 to 3 degrees at this point because the poles are shifting. And then our food is so demineralized that, I heard one statistic that they believe the nutritional value of a carrot today compared to a couple hundred years ago is that you'd have to eat 40 carrots to get the same nutritional value, vitamins and minerals, as they used to 1 carrot back then. So point being, mineral deficiency, magnetic deficiency, and all of the wackiness that our bodies are enduring right now, and then you add all of the cell towers and radio towers and EMT stuff and all that stuff, and we're all staring at screens constantly, and we've got these wired things on our heads as we're talking into another thing that's wired in front of our face known as a microphone. And so I think this is a wonderful time to reintroduce the grounding effects and the vibratory realities of the different stones that are out there.
Yeah. And there are stones actually that help counteract like the EMT frequencies and stuff like that you can use. I mean, and again, it's all vibration. If we're getting sick from it, if we're getting sick from vibration and from energies, like why would we not be able to be healed by it or affected at least as physically? Is that a real sentence? You know what I mean? Like if we believe, or people out there believe that cell phones give you cancer, like it's all electronic and like it's all frequency.
Right.
So why is it so hard to believe that crystals or stones that also have their own vibrational frequency don't have a positive effect?
Right. Because we could see, when you when you put your cell phone next to your head, start talking into it, and you hear somebody else's voice, you don't see any of that stuff traveling. Right.
Yeah. It's witchcraft.
It's all invisible. Right. The witchcraft of cell phones. It's the black obsidian brick that we all stare into. So, we don't, but we see the effects of it. We see the results of, well, my computer screen does show me pictures and there's another voice coming through the line, so on and so forth. So we understand that frequency is everywhere.
Yeah.
Yet somehow, and I think it's largely because the New Age community has glommed on to crystals and stones, that simply because the New Age community has done it, many Christians are like, keep that away from me, that's the devil.
Yeah.
Or it's not powerful. It's a joke, it's a load of crap.
Well, I think that Christianity, especially, well, kind of always has been...
Kind of always
been fear-based. Like, be
yeah.
good. Like, you're afraid of God. Like, the fear of God. You have to be afraid and to be a good person, I guess. And so it's much easier for them to operate in fear of something. And it's much easier to believe that cell phones give you cancer. That's a fear. Like, oh my gosh, no. But, like, to just believe in good is somehow way harder. And so to believe that something operating in the same way, in the same thing, could be good. Like, it's way easier for them to just fall into fear of things than to accept that something does the same thing, but for good. Same stuff.
I'm so tempted to explain. I have to do it because it is relevant. It's a journey down Bible world.
That's the Christianity part of the New Age Christianity.
Right. So the fear of God. If you're a Christian and you just heard, well, the Bible says fear the Lord. Yes, it does now. So, historically speaking, in the Hebrew context, there were no vowels. Okay, there were no vowels in their alphabet. Have I told you this?
Probably.
Okay, so there were no vowels in the Hebrew alphabet. And for thousands of years, the Bible was written and read with no vowels. And
this sounds like a bunch of throat clearing.
No.
Oh.
What happens is that the reader adds their own vowels.
That sounds safe.
Right? This is why their entire culture was not about how do you interpret this passage that we all read the same. It was, why did you read that passage that way? Why did you add the vowels you added? Now here's the coolest example ever. The difference between the word love and fear is a vowel.
Damn.
Yeah. So fear the Lord your God versus love the Lord your God. It was all in the reader's interpretation. Crazy, huh?
It's deep.
Right?
That's amazing, actually. I don't know if you've told me that or I forgot.
So when Jesus stands up and he reads this, and he reads the passage about today this has been fulfilled in your hearing, certain passages had been, over time, they had been given specific context to where it was pretty much understood that we all interpret this verse this way. Right? But there was still a lot, and most of them were about who we were identity-wise, to where it was still a discussion. That's why when Jesus was a kid and 12 years old, it was said that the rabbis at the temple were amazed by his questions, because he's literally they would sharpen each other. Well, why wouldn't you read it this way? Why would you read that? Why wouldn't you? And I think it was 400 or 600 years later after Christ, they decided to, all the new translations of the Old Testament started having vowels in them. And there were rabbis of that day who basically said that was the year, when they decided to do that was the year that God died. Right? Because the Bible wasn't meant to tell you about God. It was meant to be a mirror about how you believed about yourself.
Hence the no vowels and putting them in yourself. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, this is why I went down that rabbit hole, or that sidetrack. Because you can look at any of these things, and stones included, and you can see all the ways in which it's evil and it's bad and it's dangerous and stay away and, heck, a pox on you, New Age people. Or you can see the affirmations of what God has given us. You can see, wow, this is so cool that we have these tools, that we have X, Y, and Z, and I think that is a very beautiful introduction into the side of crystals. I think we've got a few more minutes, and I want to end with kind of some practical application, some 101. Okay. So I'm going to lean on you for that, because I don't,
Sure.
What are some of your favorites?
My favorites? Like, my absolute favorite stone is rose quartz. It's just love. All of the different kinds. Self-love, romantic love, love for the world, love for your spouse, your kids, for God. Like, it's just, like, if it weren't a rock, it'd be very warm and fuzzy. Like, it's got a really beautiful, serene energy to it. And I don't feel physically the energies. A lot of people can. Like, they'll feel it vibrating. There's been a few stones that I can actually feel. But definitely tell the effects of it when I've been carrying it with me. And when I don't. But that's probably my favorite. And there's a lot of stones that... And
how much more powerful when you put the intention with it?
That's the other thing, too. Like, you're supposed to... I mean...
Air quotes.
Yes. Oh, air quotes. Yeah. You're supposed to charge them with your intention. And for a long time, I'm like, I don't know how to do that. That sounds like some thing I need to be trained in. It's really just intention. Like, God made us as creators. And so, like, if you have a rose quartz and it has, like, all of these different possibilities of love, it'll always vibrate in that, in its natural capacity, what it would naturally vibrate as. But if you're like, and I'm having trouble with the relationship with my mother, and so you hold that rock and you're just like, I don't know. This is where it gets weird, but like, you can set your intention, like, and even in a prayer to God, if it's more comfortable to you, like, thank you for the gift of this stone. Like, I want the vibrations to help me with my relationship with my mother or my mother-in-law, most likely. But, but just setting that intention, it doesn't have to be some big, ritualistic thing. It's just your intent. Like, I'm carrying this stone because I'm believing and expecting it to help me in this area. I mean, there's a lot to our intuition about them as well. Like, there's just this big tray of stones. I don't remember what all of them do all the time because there's a lot. But intuitively, just grab some stones, put them in your pocket for the day. Later on, if you feel the need to, you can Google them. If you remember what the name of it was, look them up. And it's very much the same energy as opening your Bible and expecting a passage that's going to get you through the day. Like, just grab some stones. You can look them up later and see, like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I needed today. Like, you are energetically, because of that vibration and because of, the spiritual aspect of life in general, like, you'll be naturally drawn to the stones that you actually need for the day. And there's black tourmaline, I think, is my second favorite. Like, that's a good one to always have. It's a very grounding stone, and it helps not only to kind of shield you from negative energy from other people, but it actually kind of transmutes it into positive energy for you to reuse. Magically, obviously, but
there's
all magic.
No science to it.
None.
It's all magic.
But I mean, if like quartz, like crystal, just the clear quartz crystal is like the most common material on the planet, I guess. And like, if you sit on the beach, sand is made of quartz. Like, it's just tiny quartz crystals. And so even sitting on the beach, how relaxed and nice you feel, it's probably for a reason. Like, other than sunshine and...
Yeah, there's other frequencies, yeah.
Yeah. But...
What do you have any thoughts regarding, like, so I'm just thinking of, if you're watching the video, I have is it tiger's eye? Tiger eye?
Tiger's eye, yeah.
That's what that is, right?
Yep.
It's a yin and yang symbol carved into a tiger's eye stone. For those, that is my version of a Jesus cross, because Jesus is logic, and yin and yang to me represents that concept. Do you have any thoughts regarding adding symbology to stones?
I think that again, when we are talking about the freedom of finding what works for you in your spiritual path and what you're, discovering about yourself, this is just one facet of it. Like, you can use stones, you can grid with stones, which is sitting down and intentionally putting your energy and your focus into making a specific, layout of stones, with certain stones having their own vibration and their own frequency. And then also your intention. Like, if you were going to make one for prosperity, there's certain stones that vibrate at that frequency, the color-wise, or they represent it, and then putting it in a specific outline or layout, because there's numbers. Like, numbers have meaning and stuff as well. Even biblically, numbers have.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Right?
Numerology and geometry.
Yeah. So,
Geometria.
like, using stones in threes, or something that is based in, oh my gosh, prosperity. Like, what's a prosperous number? Isn't it 3?
Prosperous number?
Yeah.
I think I'd largely say 10.
Just because it's big.
No, because it's basically 1, but to its fullness.
Ooh.
So 10.
And so that there's
then 100, then 1,000, and all that.
There's your, like, we'll have to edit this out, so I'm just my brain dead. Yeah. Maybe we edit all of that out.
Perfect.
Yeah, so gridding can help because you're setting your intention. Like, that's what, well, we won't get to that either. Because you're sitting there, and there's something to be said for manifesting the reality that you want, doing an activity, physical activity. Like, we're manifesting vibrationally with our emotions and our prayer and our mindset, but then there's something to be said about bringing that from the spiritual realm into the physical realm. So having symbology connected, like, you're just layering it. Essentially, yeah. We could probably cut out the last 5 minutes of rambling. And we'll just go from adding symbology to crystal. So you have a stone, tiger's eye, which has all of its own vibrational benefits. And then you're also adding something that has a lot of meaning in the universal mind as well. Like, there's a whole lot behind yin and yang that we know universally.
Which is its own energy around the planet.
Exactly. Yeah. And then your personal intention of what that means to you. Like, that's a powerful thing for you. And so having crystals as just something in your bailiwick, like just some little...
In my what?
In your bailiwick. In your little bag of tricks. Like,
okay. All right.
Having them to use them. They're not the end all of everything. A lot of people put a lot of stock into that, and like, that's their thing. And that's cool because that's a lot of intention into one thing. But yeah, doing crystals with symbology, with numerology, with, sitting there with your intention also, they can get pretty powerful. Because we're creators and we make them that way, and we put that importance on them, I guess.
I've heard some pretty cool stories. Remembering the details is I just know I've heard when I first kind of opened up my mind to the idea that, okay, stones, crystals could have a spiritual value beyond, and I don't know why, I studied the whole high priestly garment, the 12 stones, and all. I studied that for years, and it never, like, smacked me upside the head like, they're rocks, right? What's the big deal about rocks? For me, it was always symbology and everything like that. Mm-hmm. But when you just back all the way out and you kind of just look at Scripture at face value and you look at it to see, like, oh my gosh, no, they are made by God. They are useful and they're beautiful, but frequency alone is really the answer to the question of so many things in the spiritual discussion. Those scientific minds or those philosophical minds to go, yeah, but why does this work, or what is it? Mm-hmm. It really all comes down to frequency, and everything is energy. Everything is frequency. And some of the stories I've heard about stones being used for healing to me, one of the best examples, and it wasn't a stone, but it was a inanimate object that got used, was when Paul's, they would cut up his work apron and send it around as prayer cloths, and they would lay it on people and people would get healed. Right. That kind of weirdness, right? It's like people are like, okay, if you want to send me a prayer cloth, I'm fine because it's in the Bible. But that crystal thing, those New Age people over there that sit naked on top of the rocks in Sedona, they're evil and they're the devil.
But so tan.
But so no, they weren't. And they were old,
Really?
old and saggy. It was bad. It was scary, but just removing the fear of realizing, look, and that I think is New Age Christianity itself. Heck, the name itself.
Yeah.
Is like, are you afraid to identify as this?
I actually Googled it because I was trying to find something, linked to something we were working on, and all of this, like, bad stuff came up. Like, be careful of New Age Christians. I'm like, oh no, what do we do?
I saw that and I was like, yes, people are Googling it. No, but seriously, I mean, that is that kind of like dichotomy of like, I want to hold on to things that are precious too. I don't want to be stupid. I don't want to dive into things. We mentioned in the last episode. Like, look, if stones are something that intrigue you, I wanted to ask you, put you on the spot. Would you be willing to do a class on these?
Yeah.
Sweet. So, if stones are something that intrigue you, and you're listening to this, crystals, rocks, and gems, and all the above, and maybe even some metal and magnets.
Oh yeah, metal.
Yeah. Clearly the frequency of gold for prosperity.
Right.
I mean, that's universal.
Yeah, there's a lot to metal. I mean, it's still a mineral. It's still earth.
Yep. So, if that intrigues you, I think anything, especially when Kat's on this show and we talk about New Age stuff, I don't think either of us would suggest just dive right in and, shut your brain off and just go have fun and go check out that local, psychic and palm reader and all that. Like, go where the Spirit leads you.
For sure.
And we have such an identity, both of us, on the show that we're not afraid, right? We're not, and that is, if we can leave you with anything, is this is not about fear, and perfect love casts out fear, right? That, by the way, even that saying, back to the whole how you read the Bible, how they would read the Bible historically, there's a reason that was such a known fact when Paul says, I think it's Paul, perfect love casts out fear. Like, he's writing to a bunch of people that go, I know that. Because they've read, for thousands of years, they've read the Bible knowing that you either read it through fear or you read it through love. And so anytime you step in, you hear the word something like crystals, or you hear vortexes, or you hear muscle testing, I don't know, some other words out there, altars and stuff like one, if you're a Christian, you come from a tradition that had that stuff all throughout it. And two, perfect love casts out fear. Be led by the Spirit and don't be afraid. And hopefully now you have a community of people, and you have, in Kat, you have a guide, a potential guide if you so choose. A Sherpa. And you have a group of people around you that are also fearless and being willing to let the Spirit introduce us to all sorts of different cool ideas. And so I don't know what the next one will be, but we will have, I'm sure, many more discussions about this kind of stuff. And some of these, like stones or different ritual concepts, may deserve a class, which would be really cool.
I'm game, yeah. And not being afraid, but being smart. And, like, just want to emphasize being Spirit-led with stuff. Because it's not only what's safe for us to get into, because there's stuff out there spiritually. Like, I'm pretty open and pretty free spiritually. There's stuff I'm not going to go near. Like, no way. But it's not a fear-based thing. It's just, there's a reality to those energies and stuff like that. And at a point, wait.
I was just thinking of not stuff you wouldn't go near. You think about, like, Abraham considered sacrificing a child.
I mean, that's fine, but like Ouija boards? No.
No way.
But being spirit-led is not only what's safe for us in general, but it's what you're specifically ready for. Like,
yes.
He eked me towards crystals for a while. Like, I had a salt lamp. Like, oh, it gives off, like, negative ions, which helps whatever.
Free
and
radicals.
So, right, and so I'm like, oh, salt lamp, normal. And then I have, like, trigeminal neuralgia, where my face, like, feels like it's exploding. And babies use amber necklaces for teething. I'm like, and so I've been using that, and it worked. And that was, like, probably 2 years before he started showing me, the images of the selenite tower or whatever. So it's, if you're open to learning more and you're open to being open, he'll get you ready for the next step. And so being spirit-led is more so about what you're ready to receive and have a grid for that revelation, than being afraid of what's out there.
Yeah, and that's key, what you have a grid for. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have one, but you have a good relationship with Spirit, then he'll build you a grid.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the joy of having, is the freedom that New Age Christianity hopes to deliver. It's okay to be brave in your journey because you don't have an angry dad who's waiting to beat you up if you screw up. Mm-hmm. Right? And you don't have if you listen to the episode on Satan, I don't believe you have this all-powerful enemy that, is waiting to devour you. You absolutely have darkness, and there's things out there. But there's an entire construct of prison that we have been born and raised in for the most part that does not exist except in our minds. And so the hope of releasing people from that, and there's probably a stone for that.
Probably.
There probably is.
Probably.
So, all right. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. As always, we appreciate your time. We know time is precious, and we do not take that lightly. And please consider donating between you and the Holy Spirit if you feel so led, or you would like to support this and more podcasts and more projects such as classes on stones, then we would highly appreciate your kind donations. And other than that, we will see you on the next episode. God bless.